Good evening and welcome to the latest instalment of Ask Andy with Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street. These events give local people the opportunity to question Andy about his plans and his continuous work to improve the West Midlands. This evening is the turn for the wonderful people of West Bromwich East who have the chance to ask Andy some questions. So just before we begin, this event will last for about an hour. It's going to be recorded. It's not live streamed, but we may use clips later on social media. If you think of a question whilst we're going, drop it in the chat and I'll do my best to put it to Andy. Any questions that don't get answered, please send them over using the email address that our moderators have provided in the chat function. So Andy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much, Nicola. And first thing I should say is good evening to everybody on the line. Delighted to be with you. I'm sorry we can't do it in person, but we always all understand why. We've been doing these Ask Andys across the region since before the last election. I've actually done one just before the lockdown came in the centre of West Bromwich, actually. So it's nice to get back to it, even though it has to be done in this virtual way. Of course, the purpose is to ask whatever you want. It's spontaneous. It's always fun for that. I don't know, of course, what you are going to ask me. So we'll see how we get on. In terms of the background to this, it's probably worth saying that it's been 3 years as mayor, plus one extra year. And my goodness, the extra one has been different to the previous 3. Had we had this discussion last year, when we were expecting the election for mayor, of course, in May 2020, I hope we'd have said it's been 3 good years for the West Midlands economy. We'd actually seen over that period 97,000 new jobs created, an incredible rate of job creation. And actually Sandwell was actually leading the pack in the last period. So really good upturn in the economy in Sandwell. But of course, over the last year, we've seen an incredible challenge, not just to our health, and we've got all the terrible stories from health across the region, but also, of course, to the economy. And although we haven't got exactly the data yet, it looks as though about 100,000 jobs have been lost. So in simple language, all the progress we made in 3 years, a lot of it has been lost in the last 1 year. So the challenge that we now face is how are we going to rebuild the momentum that we had before? And of course, learn from what was going well before, but also think about what we want to do new and differently. And dare I say it, as the Prime Minister and others say, build back better, learn from the pandemic to do things differently. And of course, in that, the way in which Sandwell prospers is a critical ingredient within that. So very happy to take any questions you want on anything, but that's, as I'm always instructed, a brief introduction for these occasions.
Thanks, Andy. So we're going to start with some pre-submitted questions that we ask people to send in. And the first one is, it's of course imperative that we protect as much of our precious green belt as we can. And here in West Bromwich East, we have a notable area in Great Barr. What have you been doing to protect our green belt?
Now, this is a very important question. It comes up so much on, I'll call it the digital doorstep, given that I can't go knocking on doors at the moment, but certainly in the post bag and the emails. And I hope we've made a really determined and clear position over this. So we've got to build new homes, particularly for our young people, and we have been building new homes. We've actually doubled the rate of house building across the West Midlands over the last 5 years, and we are on target for the number we think we need. So 17,000 homes built in each of the last 2 years, as I say, a doubling of where we were just in 2013. But the critical point is that those homes are being built on brownfield land, not green belt. So I've given a categoric commitment across the Black Country that I will do all I can to prevent any greenfield development in the sites across the Black Country. And of course, that includes Great Barr. And your MP had me standing and looking at the Great Barr Greenbelt just a few months ago on a very cold, wet Saturday lunchtime, if I remember rightly. But very clear commitment on that place. And just to pull out 1 or 2 of the examples of where we are therefore developing, the huge place, huge site in another part of Sandwell at Friar Park. That's been a derelict industrial site, derelict, I think, for about 25 years. Nothing has happened there. And we are now turning that into about 700 homes. And isn't it right to do that rather than move to Greenbelt? Because, of course, once that green space is gone, it's gone. And, of course, it's against everything we believe in terms of carbon neutrality, in terms of looking after the natural environment, in terms of the green lung for the community. So a categoric commitment there, Nicola, and we've really put our money where our mouth is, last thought, because we've won about £400 million from central government to clean up those brownfield sites to get development going. We just announced, you might have seen this actually, we just announced or are announcing another site in the middle of Oldbury, where we'll also be turning an old site at Fountain Lane into a development with Lovell as well. So that's 234 more new homes at Fountain Lane in Oldbury. Again, combined authority money enabling that development.
That's really good news. And obviously Sandwell doesn't have amples of green space. And so it's really important that we protect the green space that we do have here. The second question we've had is, there's clearly been a significant change in customers' shopping behaviours, and this has notably changed the dynamic of our town centres. What are your views on the regeneration of West Bromwich Town Centre?
Wow, a very topical question. And I think that, first of all, I should pay tribute to you, actually, Nicola, then I'll give my view, because obviously it was a brilliant announcement in the budget last week that West Bromwich, along with other towns in Sandwell, actually, let me just think about this, not in your patch, Smethwick and Rowley Regis, so not in West Bromwich East, also got cash, but 25 million for West Bromwich. I mean, you know, it rolls off our tongue, but that is a lot of money for the government to be investing in West Brom, and I know you've been a powerful advocate for that. And I think what's so very interesting is the mix of investments that were there for the town centre. So yes, some of it was right about the retail heart, the market. Some of it, though, were about new uses of the town centre, interestingly. Bringing the old town hall back as a performance venue, incredibly innovative. And of course, the investment in Sandwell College, and then of course in green links as well, cycle paths, walking ways. So to make the town centre more accessible. So really exciting what you did. But perhaps what's behind the question is, what do I think is going to happen with retail? So maybe I should just say a little bit about that, but we have got that brilliant news. And of course, the changes are happening to retail very, very fast. It was my whole background. Some on the line might know I spent 30 years in John Lewis, 10 years before I did this job as CEO. So it was in my blood then. And what I now see is huge change to retail. But there will still be a future for retail in our town centres, good retail, particularly local retail, distinct retail. And of course, there is a role for some big brands. Think about Primark in West Brom Town Centre. That's a huge success. So there will still be retail, but there will need to be other things as well. So a lot more people will live in our town centres, and that will provide, of course, custom for the retail and, of course, the cafes and the restaurants. So one of the things I've been really pleased that the Combined Authority has done is put the money on the table for the demolition of Bull Street car park, an old, antiquated, frankly, past its sell-by date car park, being demolished. And now developers are coming forward. I was actually with one just this morning that you might not know about, actually, where they were talking about coming forward for that development. And we will see more retail. We will see more leisure, and we'll see leisure, hospitality, and we'll see entertainment. And that's why the town hall refurbishment as a venue is so important. And I also want to see more sort of startup spaces as well. We've got a real explosion in startup businesses. They too should be located in our high streets. And of course, our public services, and the college is a brilliant example of that. So town centres will change, but they will still be vibrant meeting places with ease of public transport, great facilities. So please, they're not far from dead yet, and we've got to go with the changes and invest behind them, as indeed you've demonstrated.
Thanks, Andy. The third question that has been submitted is, amidst this global pandemic, the economy has clearly been struggling. What regional actions have you taken on jobs and investment?
Yeah, really, really important question, this. So, as I said, probably, haven't got exact numbers yet, 100,000 jobs lost over the pandemic. So we need a plan. And I'm very pleased to say we've got a plan. I'm going to hold up Exhibit A, if I'm allowed to, in a Q&A session like this. And it's called the Mayor's Jobs Plan. It says getting the West Midlands back to work. And it talks about how we are going to deliver 100,000 jobs over the next 2 years. So it's not fantasy. It's not Never Never Land. It's what is going to happen now. And I'm all the numbers are there. If anyone wants to dig in it, it's on the on my own website. If people want to look at it, it's all there, all the detail. And I think it's probably, I'm not going to go through every line of it, but it's probably worth just pulling out some highlights, Nicola. It certainly talks about supporting those sectors that have had a hard time to come back. Hospitality being the best example, because if we bring them back, that will bring back jobs. And what I've been trying to do is make sure the government listens, puts those grants on the table, extends VAT holidays, extends the business rates holidays. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, of course, getting behind the really big opportunities that are unique to the region. HS2, and it's fantastic. 12,000 jobs from HS2 already, 5,000 more in the West Midlands in the next few years alone. And we want to make sure as many contracts as possible go to local companies. And then there's the whole question about thinking about the growth sectors in the West Midlands. So some have taken a tough time, but there are growth sectors like life sciences. And you ask about big regional investments, the £200 million invested in the Selly Oak area for that new life science campus. I mean, that is going to be incredible, put us right at the leading edge of a growth industry. And of course, then a little nearer to home, just over your border at Phoenix 10, bringing that whole site on the M6 back Phoenix 10, just in Walsall, but serving Sandwell in your area as well. That whole huge derelict site coming back to use for new industry there as well, hopefully for the electrified automotive industry. So an area there. But then the last thing I should just call out, as I say, I won't go through it all, but the last thing I should call out is this retraining issue, because you said, where can we find jobs, how get people back to work? And so we're doing a great deal about retraining young people. So of course, the national government has the Kickstart scheme, 20,000 opportunities in the West Midlands, but something I'm very proud of locally that we've worked on, that we call our sector-based work academy. It's a bit of jargon, but it's basically working with each of our colleges in the sectors that are growing. And there's a whole prospectus there, every college, including Sandwell, what are they putting on, funded by the combined authority, to get people the skills for the growth sectors. And one particular area is, of course, digital skills. And the people who are going through our digital boot camps, as we call them, nearly all of them get a really good job at the end of it. So protect what we've got, get behind the growth sectors, and retrain people who unfortunately have fallen out of work. It is a plan, 100,000 jobs.
Very good. Thank you, Andy. The fourth question is there's under a week to go until Young Carers Action Day, which is on the 16th of March. With Sandwell Young Carers being based in West Bromwich East, what can Andy do to help a generation of young carers in the West Midlands?
I think one of the it almost links up the thing I've just been talking about, actually. And one of the growth areas, I talked about digital, I talked about life sciences, but I could have talked about jobs in healthcare as well, actually. And so one of the whole areas that we're doing this training is in jobs in healthcare. Now, lots of the carers have probably got, I'm guessing, but have probably got first qualifications. So what can we do to stretch those qualifications through the levels and enable people to move on to higher jobs in that sector? And of course, what we're trying to do with all of our training is we're trying to focus it on women. So over 60% of our adult education budget goes to women. I suspect lots of the young carers are young women. And we're also trying to focus on BME groups and disadvantaged groups. So again, disproportionate amount of our budget goes there. And again, I suspect a good proportion of the carers are from BME communities as well. So really, the critical thing is, what provision is there for you to stretch the careers you've already started on? Can we get you through higher level qualifications? I hope that's a very practical answer to the question, Nicola.
Yeah, and I think as well, Andy, we both were there for the launch of the Youth Hub yesterday.
Yes.
Going to be a real focus on the mental health and extra support for young people, because everyone will have gone through a difficult time, right, over the last year, and young carers especially. So hopefully there's a real focus in general on that aspect of things that will help young carers too.
There is, and let me give you a really specific example where we've had success there. So we all know that the mental health challenges have been multiplied many times over with the pandemic, and I suspect lots of the carers are actually dealing with people who need to be cared with mental health issues. So one of the things I'm actually very pleased we've been able to do through the pandemic, first of all, making all of our sort of mental health advice available through the Thrive at Home programme, but particularly our Thrive into Work programme has got actually 600 people across the Black Country into work who are having a mental health conditions. And we've just received, on the success of that, another £6 million of government funding to expand that programme specifically for the Black Country. So again, there's a real practical programme that is there, Thrive into Work, it's called. Again, all available on our website if you want to have a look at that. So what comes out of this, whether it be the Youth Hub that you launched with me yesterday, whether it be that program, whether it be the retraining programs, we've got a number of things that I think are really practical ways forward for this group.
Thank you. We're moving on now to questions from the floor. So the first one we've got tonight is, we'd like to hear more about the route of the Green Bridge planned to connect West Brom Town Centre and Dartmouth Park under the new regeneration plan. Are there more details available?
Well, it's a great question, but I have a funny feeling you would be the better person to answer it than me, Nicola, because this is a lovely local question. So I'm going to let you answer it first, which I think is in the rules of the game, and then I'll give a more general answer about some of these green routes and what we're trying to do across the region. But why don't you pick up the specific one first of all?
So what we know so far is that there isn't a very good connection from the town centre to Dartmouth Park and Sandwell Valley, which is a beautiful place to go and walk around. I found it great during lockdown to go for walks around there. But there isn't a good walk route. There's definitely not a good cycle route. It's not linked up at all. So it is just about creating a link. I don't know in what form that will take yet, because the plans are just being developed. This was part of the bid that went to the government and it's been approved. The finances have been approved. But in terms of what it looks like, we don't know that yet. And I think there's 4 different green areas we'll have in the town centre as part of this too. So there's more greenery within the town centre itself. So it's making use of what we've got, which is good.
And can I just say, that's brilliant, Nicola, thank you. But can I just jump in on what I might call the region-wide context of this? Because obviously each individual route that, such as you've just described, is part of a bigger network. And what we're trying to do is, we call it the Starley network for our walking and cycling routes. Just to give you a bit of a detour onto why we call it that, but these occasions you can always do that. It's named after a Mr. John Starley from Coventry, who actually was the first mass manufacturer of conventional bicycles, rather than the penny farthing shape, the conventional shape that we all now enjoy. So we've taken one of the region's industrial leaders and given his name. And anyway, the idea is this network, which will end up being about 500 miles of protected walking and cycling routes, takes what we've already got, like our canal towpaths, like of course the routes through Sandwell Valley, and actually connects, fills in the missing links and builds some new one. And we are steadily, I would say, colouring it in as we get money for the different elements of it, and this will be a great example of that. But I felt very strongly that it was all very fragmented and we needed one overall approach to this. So we know what we're trying to achieve, and being entirely honest, we'll go as fast as we can raise the money for the different elements of it. We just announced today, actually not in West Brom, but in Coventry, at the second part of the Binley Road segregated route, with our sprint routes that we've just announced. We will do a segregated route alongside them. So steadily we colour in this overall network. And that, of course, is also part of our commitment to carbon neutrality. The more we can get people to walk, cycle, not have to ride, not have to drive, then obviously that's all a good thing in that way as well.
Great. So our next question is, I run a tech startup focusing on poetry and prose. Can you speak more about the opportunities for startup firms in the West Midlands?
Yes, I can. It depends a bit what you mean by the question, because that can be taken all sorts of ways. And what I will not do in any way is as good a job as an individual entrepreneur as to what their niche is and what they're going to do with their business. So I will defer to you on the market for pros and all that. So let's just give a few general observations on it. The first is that we've got a brilliant startup record. Actually, Birmingham as a city and the West Midlands as a region did really well in terms of an increase in number of startups last year. So actually on the back of the pandemic, we've actually had a real surge in startups, and the data for Sandwell was very encouraging as well. I think the increase was about 26% for Sandwell year on year, but it was really good. But my apologies if I can't remember every borough precisely a number. And what we're also getting better at, and maybe this is to the heart of the question that the question asks, is the survival rate of those startups and actually how they then scale up, so how they grow. Now, and we're just about on national average now for the survival rate and growth rate, which is really good because we used to be not so good at this. And a particular thing that we've done, which will be relevant to your sector, is we put these scale up programs in place to support businesses to grow. And we did one with the creative scale up, it was called, and we took young businesses funded partly by government, partly by the combined authority, and gave them, for example, tuition in, or mentorship you might call it, in marketing, in building a business plan, in financing, really critical how to use that. And we've seen some really good success in those companies we've taken. Now you'll say, is that opportunity still open to me? And I think nominations for that particular program have just closed, but we're doing other like that in what we call our innovation program. And so it's definitely a thing to keep a lookout for that sort of training. And of course, really exciting, the government must have seen what we've been up to. The government in the budget, Rishi talked about the Help to Grow programs, which was specifically about management development for the owners of startups to try to get them to grow. And that too was in marketing, in management, all of those things. So hopefully there will be a national support scheme for that coming. And of course, the lovely thing about your sector is the creative sector is growing faster than anywhere else. So I'd be very optimistic about your chances of growing and scaling in that sector. But hopefully that gives you a bit of background about how we've tried to help the growth in that sector.
Thank you. This one's a bit of a longer question. The move towards greater home working and the desire for more space at home due to lockdown has led to a large number of young professionals and families thinking of resettling or returning from London and the South East to the Midlands.
Yes.
Thanks to your work, there are now many more opportunities for such young people to get jobs in the West Midlands. Are there any plans to target these groups to encourage them to move to our area, bringing their talent and skills with them to our region? And how can you help boost home building to keep up with this demand?
Well, a fantastic question. So just a stat, first of all, because it's incredibly topical. Before the pandemic struck, we get data every year about where, as the question said, where young Londoners are moving to. And actually the West Midlands was top of the poll by a long way. I think the number was about 16,000 Londoners came here in 1 year. And that was the number for Manchester was 10,000. The number for Leeds was 6,000, I think. So the point is obvious. We were easily top of the poll. And we were actually at last having a net benefit rather than net loss. Now that last figure, I should be entirely honest, is for the city of Birmingham, not for the whole of the West Midlands. The first figure, the 16, was the whole of the West Midlands. So what you mentioned was definitely happening. Now, the way we do this, and I should probably say, why was it happening? Three things, I think. One, quality of houses and choice, and the fact we were building many more homes was definitely a part of that. Two, the access to green spaces, quality of life, all of those things compared to an over-congested London. And of course, thirdly, good jobs being available. So the economic recovery was really driving this. So to answer your question, what we are not doing is a sort of come relocate in the West Midlands campaign. But what we do through the Growth Company, which is sort of part of the combined authority, is work actively to try to get businesses to relocate so that they then bring their employees with them. And obviously the biggest success there was their HSBC relocation. And it's fascinating. People have lived across the whole region and worked there. So that's the way we approach it. But what we actively are doing is making sure the housing supply is meeting this demand. And I think I've explained how we're trying to drive the housing market in that way. And actually a really positive feature of the last year is housing starts have continued really positively, and you see almost every day new news of new housing schemes starting. So that's really positive, actually.
Thank you. Shorter question this time.
Yeah.
Why was the Perry Barr flyover demolished?
Why was the Perry Barr flyover demolished? Oh, well, I think you all know I didn't agree with the Perry Barr flyover being demolished, and most residents of your constituency, particularly the eastern part of your constituency, definitely didn't agree. I think, frankly, it was because Birmingham City Council chose to do it and they wouldn't take any notice of local opinion. There was just an avalanche of views in the consultation, but they very much said, we know better. I other to be fair to Sandwell Council, they lobbied over this. Local MPs did. Walsall Council lobbied vociferously, but it was a decision by the Labour-run Birmingham City Council. It was the wrong decision because actually it is just going to cause more congestion long term. No question about that. And of course, as we're trying to get people to, again, leave their cars at home, use the public transport that's there, we could put the public transport around the flyover that was already there. Indeed, you saw the X51 bus whizzing along the flyover already. So it was a good example of a quick public transport route.
Totally agree with you there, Andy. It's a shame. We tried to stop it, but there was nothing that we could do, was there? Next question. Andy's done such a great job as mayor of the West Midlands, and now we're certainly getting noticed in Westminster and Whitehall. He's also used his experience in business and led a cross-party approach in the West Midlands to find a solution for cladding and leaseholder issues, which has been a hot topic recently. Does Andy feel like this situation can be overcome successfully?
Gosh, what an interesting question. So thank you for the kind things you said at the beginning, but really interesting. So I always believe in being 100% honest in these Q&As. And as the question said, one of the things I've tried to do is draw people together actually in a reasonably non-partisan way. I'm very proud to be a Conservative, proud to work with the government, but on occasions you can acknowledge there's a little bit more they can do. So they've obviously moved a hell of a long way, the government have. £3.5 billion that Robert Jenrick secured maybe 3 weeks ago now is a lot of money when the treasury is stretched, and he must have had to work very, very hard, and we welcome that. But it isn't, what he's done so far is not enough to solve all the issues. So there are issues to do with insurance premium, which leaseholders are having to pay before the remediation is done. These waking watches, if people are not prepared to insure them. So a number of blocks tends to be the high-rise ones, these, where they're having to incur that. And again, we've not got the money come to reimburse that. And of course, there are some things that have come to light which are actually not cladding issues. They're to do with other fire safety issues within the buildings, and the steps taken by the government won't yet address them. So what I will intend to do, what I am continuing to do, is work with the lobbying organisation, which is called Bromwich. Most of these buildings are in Birmingham, but some are around the rest of the conurbation. But it takes, like the Greater Manchester scheme, like the Leeds scheme, it takes one branding, Bromwich. We will continue to work with them to try to get further action from government, and there will need to be some more to genuinely get this solved. And it's actually going to need everyone to play their part in this. So yes, government are going to have to put some money on the table. The developers are going to have to put more money on the table. The insurance industry is going to have to come to the table as well. And thus far, they've been very standoffish. And I suspect actually in the end, some of the leaseholders are going to have to make some small contributions, hopefully over a very long term as well. But we've got to do a lot more to bring all of that together yet, Nicola.
Thanks, Andy. Next question. What's being done about attracting more business and jobs to West Bromwich and the West Midlands in general?
We have, of course, the whole West Midlands Growth Company. Its very job is to attract businesses and jobs to the region. And just to remind us, in the year before the pandemic, again, 4,000 jobs attracted to the West Midlands, and we were top region outside London, I think, for the 7th year in a row. So a lot was going good. But let's give one mega example of this that I've not talked about yet, because I think it's such a sort of galvanizing one for us to think about. Everyone in the West Bromwich and indeed across the West Midlands is really proud of our automotive industry. I mean, you've got some brilliant automotive companies in your patch. We went, of course, to the brilliant steel processor in your patch just before Christmas, I think. William King, exactly, with Mr. Worley, wonderful, a chairman who's been there for how many years? Did you say been 55 years there? I mean, incredible. So, you know, that business is supplying automotive. Automotive will change, and it will change to an electrified business. And so what we've got to do is we've got to go with that change. We can't hold it back. Brilliant to hear that Jaguar Land Rover is fully engaging in electrification. And of course, to be successful in electrification, we have to manufacture the batteries here. So that's why we got the first sort of research centre, the battery, it's called the National Battery Industrialisation Centre. It's in Coventry, but it serves the whole of the region's industry. And now we are bidding, and this comes to getting inward investments, right to the question, for the gigafactory where those batteries will be manufactured. That's about 4,000 jobs directly in the factory. That is in Coventry, but it will directly impact the fortunes of companies like William King, because that will mean that there is demand for their product going forward. And another incredible manufacturer, it's just over in Sean's patch actually, rather than yours, Nicola, Alucast in Wednesbury, another automotive manufacturer, that supplier that I visited again just before Christmas. And you see that the future of these companies is absolutely tied up in the move to electrification, because they will still need the metallic parts, of course. And we've got, therefore, to win that investment for the gigafactory. And that's why I was so delighted we got our site agreed, and we're now working with government to win the investor there. But it's sort of, to me, it's totemic. It's a must-win one, if I'm very honest.
Absolutely. And we already seen over the weekend good news about automotive manufacturing in Warwickshire?
Yeah, so if I'm allowed to talk about Warwickshire, there's so much good news with this whole sort of, because the whole idea was to build a sort of cluster here. So if you take the wider region, obviously London Electric Vehicle Company based in Anstey Park in Coventry, that has actually been taking on more people for making electric taxis and electric vans, and they're being tested here. Then, of course, Lotus have set up their research centre in Warwickshire. They've agreed to move from their historical base in Norfolk to come and do that because the expertise is here. And one that I really love, and we had to work actively, and the Growth Company did this as the agency. We've seen the Norton Motorcycle Company, a famous name, had gone into liquidation, has been bought up by an Indian investor called TVS, a huge Indian company, and they are relocating manufacturing to Solihull because, again, they wanted to be part of this cluster. So I know all of those are Warwickshire, Solihull, but they all feed off the expertise in the Black Country for the metal manufacturing, and it's one total system, really. So very exciting, and we've seen at least 3 big names there all making those commitments. And of course, you're also right. I know what you're also prompting me on, Nicola. I wasn't thinking Aston Martin making their commitment to build their electric sports car at their facility by Gaydon in Warwickshire. So you can see the story building. It's all of that expertise in one place.
Yeah, and good news for the West Midlands is good news for us here in Sandwell as suppliers and as people that want the job. So it's exactly. Really good news.
And I'll give you another little example which links to the 100,000 plan of this sector, you see. And this was Wolverhampton College, but again, lots of your residents will go to Wolverhampton College. And it's a real example of what I was talking about, the jobs of the future. So they have set up, with combined authority funding, a new faculty, really, training engineers in electric vehicle maintenance. So yeah, we're going to manufacture them, do the design, do the R&D. Right at the other end of the whole chain is how are these things going to be maintained? 3% of mechanics can maintain an electric vehicle. So what have we done? We've set up a new faculty there. 720 youngsters will go through that faculty to gain that experience. And it's a classic of exactly what I was talking earlier on about the jobs plan.
Very good, thank you. Next question. Now this is about crime, and although it's not your responsibility, I know you have an opinion on this, Andy. In West Bromwich East, we are experiencing an increase in crime, such as catalytic converters being stolen from people's cars outside their homes. We had a murder in Hampstead where a 19-year-old lost their life with another injured. That was this week, which was horrific. Sad. Can you reassure residents that crime in the region is top of your agenda? How do you intend to address these issues? And are there plans to launch a communications campaign to raise respect for police officers, as it seems to be lacking? You might want to explain why this isn't your role.
Yeah. Let me. It's a really good question, thank you. And let me explain who's responsible for what here, and then I'll come head on to the question. There's 2 directly elected roles across the whole region: my role, and then the Police and Crime Commissioner's role. And obviously, the Police and Crime Commissioner, there'll be an election for that role on the same day as the mayoral election. And the current Police and Crime Commissioner is the Labour Commissioner, David Jameson. He's been in post, I think, for about 5 or 6 years now, and there was another Labour Commissioner before him. And they have responsibility for what you might call the policing strategy and overseeing the West Midlands Police Force, alongside, of course, the Chief Constable. So the direct questions are rather more for him. But I am a firm believer that we need a new leadership in the Police and Crime Commissioner's role. And that's why I am backing strongly the Conservative candidate Jai Singh Sohal, who is up for election on the same day as me. And so, for example, he has given a very clear commitment that all the police stations that are currently still open in the West Midlands will remain open, subject to review, whereas the current commissioner is looking to close a number of them. And you may be interested that 44 police stations have been closed across the West Midlands in the years of a Labour commissioner. And I just think that's all wrong in terms of building confidence, respect for police in neighbourhoods if they are not there in our communities, which of course is all part of the question. Of course, the government have also committed to many more police officers. And I think the news was out today, actually, 6,600 already recruited of the 20,000 promised. And I think the number for the West Midlands for the next year is 346. So we're getting on with that commitment to recruit more police officers. But they do need to be on the front line in communities, getting intelligence, building that. And that's the way, of course, that you actually build that respect and alliance with local policing.
Definitely. I didn't say this earlier on, but part of what we're doing in the town centre in West Bromwich will also hopefully help with the issues we have with crime. For instance, there'll be drug dealing happening under the outdoor market because they can shelter from CCTV. And you've got a kind of chicken and egg situation where people don't want to shop in the town centre because they don't feel safe. We want to get them back, and we need to deal with the crime there too. So it all rolls into all the other stuff that we work on about encouraging people to come to the area. It's right that we get policing right too.
And I think you make a really critical point, Nicola, that all of these issues are different sides of the same coin, actually. So my firm commitment is to work as actively as I possibly can on this with the new Police and Crime Commissioner, if elected, of course, yourself, local councils. Everyone has a role to play in this. And of course, everything we've talked about, retraining youngsters, getting them back into jobs, this is also a critical part of it. And just one last thought on this. I hope the questioner won't mind the comparison. I do have one direct responsibility for crime, and that's to do with crime on public transport, actually, is responsible for that. And it's worth just saying what's happened. We've invested very heavily in what we call the Safer Transport Police, which is a collaboration between West Midlands Police and Transport for the West Midlands, which obviously reports to me. And we've got additional officers, not less, additional officers out on the front line. And we've actually seen a reduction in crime on our public transport. Over the longer term, actually a pretty dramatic reduction in crime on public transport. And now the incidents are very low. And one of the reasons for that is, again, all the technology. So now every single vehicle out on our network is connected back to one regional control centre. And for example, just recent news, our trams, which go right through the middle of your patch, of course, Nicola, all now have 5G technology on them, which gives us an instant image of anything that's happening on our trams straight into our control centre. And then we can get in touch with those out on the network to deal with any incident. And I think there's no coincidence that actually a crime on transport network has come down, because criminals sadly sniff out where the weakest points are, and we've worked very hard to make sure our transport network is anything but the weakest point.
That's great news about 5G on the metros. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, that was announced only yesterday, so you're forgiven. But it's a brilliant example of taking new technology and making it really practical for a public service. And we are the first place in the country to do that. And obviously means that the images are instant and of really good quality. So yeah, brilliant.
Good work.
I'll say it myself. Yeah.
Next question we have. I live in the Great Barr area of the constituency. Because we're so close to Walsall, I feel like we're sometimes get neglected and a little left behind. Our library is closed down, and there are suggestions that local GP surgeries might be closing too. What have you done to invest in areas like ours, which have felt left behind for so long?
Okay, so let me just think. I don't think I can say I have personally invested in Great Barr. We are, of course, again, if you think about the transport brief, investing in the transport along the Walsall Road with a new rapid bus network, which will improve dramatically the times along there, notwithstanding the Perry Barr flyover piece that we talked about. So that actually up through the Scott Arms will help you. And we're also looking at how we deal with the traffic congestion at the Scott Arms as well in that area. And we also did mention Great Barr in terms of the Greenbelt earlier on. But I think I want to make a more general point, actually, because there's a very important point here behind the questionnaire. When this mayoralty was conceived, there was a bit of skepticism in the Black Country, and people said, all the money's going to go to Birmingham. It's going to swallow everything up. And I can put my hand on my heart and say that has not happened. If you think what's happening across Sandwell at the moment, the biggest public transport investment of all is, of course, the extension of the metro through from Wednesbury down through Tipton, Great Bridge, and then obviously on to Dudley Port and into Dudley and Brierley Hill. You think of the Aquatic Centre in Londonderry in the south of Sandwell. You think of the, now that, of course, I can't claim to put the money on the table for that, but I can absolutely have claimed to have been the person who was there winning the bid for the Commonwealth Games. You think of the incredible investment around the Midland Metropolitan Hospital. And I was the one who, when Carillion went bust, I had the minister up here, made sure we blinking well got the money for the reinvestment very quickly. And of course, with Nicola, I've been banging on the drum for the Sandwell Towns funds as well for West Bromwich. So actually, and of course, we've already talked about housing schemes. The single biggest one I said was at Friar Park, and we've also talked about Oldbury as well. So actually, when you look at the total investment going into Sandwell now, I would actually say it is unprecedented. And we've talked, of course, about the college as well and what we've been working on there. So I might not have a perfect answer for Great Barr, but if you take Sandwell as a whole, I'm actually really happy that anyone examines whether the mayor's role has brought investment into a borough that historically probably had been a bit overshadowed by investment that went into Birmingham. I absolutely promised I'd be a mayor for all of the region, not just Birmingham. And I think the evidence of where money has gone shows that has definitely been done.
Yeah, I have this come up quite a lot, and I totally agree that Great Barr gets left behind in terms of Sandwell investment historically, and because of the issue of where the borders are. That you've already pointed it out, the traffic congestion at the Scott Arms is a key example where, because it lies between three local authorities of Sandwell, Walsall and Birmingham, none of them are going to take responsibility for it and invest money to sort it out. That's why it's useful to have people like Andy on board who does cover the whole area. And I've been lobbying ministers about this since I was elected, because that would be, for me, an initial good thing to get sorted. But also in your future vision for the metro extension, Andy, it does include a link with Great Barr, doesn't it? And
it does indeed. It does indeed.
I have been nagging the transport sector about this.
So I think I have a funny feeling this will be the next lobbying from your member of parliament, but absolutely, because, you know, we all know that route through the Scott Arms, both north, south and east west, is incredibly congested, and the bus is a pretty good service actually, both ways, but we need better public transport. So Nicola has been lobbying me to make the next metro link north from Wednesbury through Great Barr, then we'll come through Great Barr into Walsall. So absolutely. That we will look at that in the next term,
which would be great. And we'll look into the library issue and the doctor surgeries, because that's not good enough. But there's definitely more that needs to be invested in terms of local shops and things around them. But that's it's a long-term plan there that we need to put together. You've already touched on the Commonwealth Games, Andy, but we've had one question through. How will the Commonwealth Games benefit people like me who live in West Brom?
Yeah, there's, I think, 3 direct answers to that. The first is you will have some wonderful facilities on your doorstep. There will be probably the best swimming pool in Britain. Now, you might say you don't want to use that, but my goodness, for a community that needs to be active, all of those things, it is a brilliant facility that we're building, that literally state-of-the-art pool. And I hope this isn't cheeky. I suspect Sandwell wouldn't have got that type of facility without the catalyst of the Commonwealth Games. And when I was literally there talking to ministers, talking to the Federation who awarded the Games, I kept saying, this Games will be for all of the region, not just Birmingham. And that facility being there is clear evidence of that. The second thing, again, you might say it's a bit distant, but I want to spell it out. I hope if you do work for a business, it will benefit. So one of the wonderful opportunities from the Commonwealth Games, and we've got specific money for this, is to promote West Midlands businesses around the world. It's just what happened in the London Olympics. We call it a trade and tourism and investment plan, and we will literally be we're calling it the Road to Birmingham 2022, and we'll be starting at the World Expo in this October. Funding all secured from the budget last year. I literally banged the Treasury's door down for it. We'll be starting promoting West Midlands businesses in Dubai for the World Expo this year. And if they can win new contracts on the back of that, of course, that's good for employees. And again, that's across the whole region. And then the third way is I genuinely hope you'll be able to participate and maybe learn and get a new skill. So one thing, and it's the Combined Authority that's responsible for the jobs and skills part of the Commonwealth Games. And we are determined that everyone who volunteers, even if it's just that, or you might get a temporary job or something, you will get a qualification from it so that you'll then be able to use that in the future. So that is definitely progress from the wonderful volunteers in London, but they didn't actually get any qualification or certification that they use going forward, and that's what we're trying to do. We think there's about 6,000 job opportunities through the Games. So again, I hope citizens of West Bromwich will get their fair share of those.
That's great. I'll be encouraging people in West Brom to have a look and take up those jobs. What an exciting opportunity for a young person as well. Next question. Growing up in West Bromwich, the predominant form of employment was working in factories and foundries. This isn't the case anymore. What do you think the future holds?
Oh, well, in a sense, we've covered this, haven't we? If we think of the growth sectors we talked about, we heard that wonderful startup, in the creative sector. That's going to be important, the whole digital technologies. And actually, if you look, say you looked on LinkedIn at job vacancies at the moment, the biggest area is actually in the digital and tech. So that, and whether you be working for a big company in their IT department, or whether you be working for a digital startup or something, there's all sort of aspects of that. Then, of course, some of the really exciting public sector areas are there. We talked about healthcare. That's going to be really big, I'm sure. And then, of course, we talked about some of the new industries as well. And one of them that we talked about, obviously, the electrification, but that whole sort of green and clean growth. Do you know there's over 1,000 firms in the West Midlands now looking at the decarbonisation of our economy? So, and it's actually a boom sector for us. So what I think is fascinating is that although, of course, we're very, very preoccupied about what we've lost, there are some incredible new signs of growth coming through.
Great. What is going to happen to Bull Street car park now it's been demolished?
Yeah, so it's great that it's been demolished because it was a bit of an eyesore, wasn't it? And Nicola and I were there on the day the wrecking ball came in, and that was great. And the CA put the money on the table for that, so that was good. So the aim is to find a developer who will then turn it into housing-based regeneration, but hopefully it'll have some other commercial activities in it. And as I said, I was talking to a developer about it only this morning. And the whole idea of the CA use of its money is we spend the money to sort of reclaim the site, and then a private sector developer can then make a go of the redevelopment that will occur. And I'm I'm not going to mention any names, that would be all wrong, but I know at least 2 really big reputable developers who are doing schemes close by, who I'm probably giving too much away here, who are looking over that site now we've done the demolition.
Great. Is the cycle hire scheme coming here to West Brom?
Yes, the cycle hire scheme is coming. So we did a trial, West Midlands wide, a trial of the West Midlands wide scheme for a month in Sutton Coldfield, using the park. And that went well, all worked. So Monday, time flies by, we launched formally in Wolverhampton, and every borough will be launched by July. So yes, it's definitely coming, not just to West Brom, all of Sandwell, and there will be 1,500 bikes across the West Midlands by July.
Great. This one's an exciting one. What will you do for residents in West Bromwich if you're re-elected, Andy?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think actually the jobs piece is the critical piece. I don't want to be glib because there's lots of other things. We've talked about crime, we've talked about transport, we've talked about housing schemes, haven't we? But if you said to me, what is the overwhelming issue at the moment? That is it. I remember we had a meeting at the West Bromwich Jobs Centre. Nicola was there. It was March last year. Therese Coffey came and we asked the guy who runs the job centre there, how's the market? And he said, it's really strong. Robust was his exact word. And for that to be said in West Brom was brilliant. And of course, when we had the meeting yesterday for the launch of the Youth Hub, it was not nearly as good a picture. So I think it's pretty categoric. We've got to get back to the guy running the job centre saying it's robust and we've addressed what we need to.
And for me, Andy, if I can be a bit cheeky here, the way that I think you can help me and we can help West Brom is by driving investment, and having you on board with the combined authority is really key to that. It's something that we've been lagging behind in for, before you were first elected. It hadn't happened here. Yeah, and with HS2 on the horizon too, we need to be selling Sandwell and West Bromwich as a place to invest and move to and bring up your family. And so it's a big job, but one that I know you're going to be, leading the way on.
Yeah. Oh yes. Oh yes.
So I think we've got time for at least one more question.
One more, and then we'll be nearly up on an hour, as you said at the beginning. One last one then.
So the announcement of the Gigafactory plans for our region, incredibly exciting, and the benefits will hopefully be seen here in West Bromwich. Yeah. How do you intend to upskill our young people for these jobs?
Oh, well, so I think actually, again, we've talked about a bit about this, but these are some existing skills, the whole engineering piece. There's a huge piece about IT. If you go and look around the Battery Industrialisation Centre and see what they're doing, actually to run these plants, it's an IT, it's a digitally controlled piece. So that's very important. And of course, there's a huge piece about chemistry as well. So that traditional thing that some of us hated at school is really relevant. But the critical point is we will work with our colleges and with our universities to make sure that those skills that are relevant to that new sector are being taught. And we've got a particular automotive sector skills plan which includes this. And I think perhaps to sort of make the obvious point at the end, that's the whole point of having a mayor and a combined authority that can look at this total picture. When we were just fragmented and Sandwell was thinking about itself and wasn't connected to the wider automotive industry, maybe in Warwickshire, that was perhaps not as strong. But what we're now able to do is say, what's the plan for the region's economy? How does that feed through into our colleges? Now working with all 20 colleges in unison to look at exactly what is going to be provided. So it's that sort of planning piece that comes through there.
And we've already seen that in West Bromwich, part of the Towns deal, which Andy mentioned. We've got the mechanical centre at Sandwell College. And the reason that we know where to invest in that is because the combined authority under Andy's leadership has done the research to find out where there's a gap.
Yeah. So one of the lovely things that happened to me this year, and it wasn't actually at Sandwell College, but lots of brilliant things have happened to me at Sandwell College, but actually it was in Walsall College, where the principal showed me the curriculum, and he showed me how it mapped on to the future economic opportunities in the regional economic plan. Might sound dry, but that's what matters to life chances of young people in the Black Country. And I just thought when I saw that, yes, we're getting there. This is joined up in a planful way. And exactly the same at Sandwell College when we've seen some of their new programmes. Yeah, and of course we talked about Wolverhampton and the mechanics. So that's how it works. You have to join that up.
Yep, totally. Well, thank you so much, Andy, and thanks to everyone that submitted their questions. It's been great to talk about West Bromwich East, and I think there's another link that's been sent on the chat there. So if there's any questions that haven't been answered, you can send them in to Andy to answer another time.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Thank you for your advocacy. It has made a difference. Great to work with you. And of course, thank you to everyone for listening and indeed for your very varied questions. Okay, good night then, everybody.
Bye.